Homeless girl gives her only necklace to a young millionaire and says, "Sir, this is yours." When he sees the little pendant, he is shocked. The streets of San Francisco whispered secrets only a few could hear. Beneath the towering glass giants of the financial district, where men and women in sharp suits rushed to meetings with eyes fixed on their screens, a 13-year-old girl named Emily Carter wandered the cold pavement with silent footsteps. She was there, every day, by the edge of Market Street or near the Castro underpass, yet no one ever seemed to notice her. Not really. Emily had learned to make herself small, not just physically, but in presence. Her tattered gray hoodie helped her blend in with the concrete. Her jeans, 2 sizes too large, had long surrendered their original color. And the thin blanket she carried, rolled tightly and slung over her shoulder with a rope, was her only shield against the sharp wind that sliced through the city every night. 2 years had passed since the crash. The sound of metal grinding and glass shattering still visited her in dreams. One second she had a mother and father, and the next, there was just silence. A distant relative had taken her in at first, but it hadn't lasted. One too many burdens, one too many nights with no dinner, and finally, one locked door that never opened again. Emily stopped counting the days after that. Now, she lived under the awning of a closed record store on 8th Street. Every morning, she packed her things before sunrise to avoid trouble and carried her most treasured possession around her neck, a thin silver necklace with a small circular pendant. The metal had dulled with time, but to her, it shimmered like the first day her mother had placed it around her neck. "Never take it off," her mother had whispered, the words seared into Emily's memory more clearly than any photograph. "It's your anchor. No matter where life takes you." Most days, Emily sat cross-legged near a food truck that sold overpriced fusion tacos. Tourists passed. Tech workers passed. The world passed. But Emily remained, drawing. Her notebook, spiral-bound, its pages curled and soft from the fog, was filled with sketches. Faces. Hands. Animals. A giraffe peeking through clouds. A mother hugging a child beneath a tree. A boy on a swing, laughing. She didn't know why she drew them. She just did. It was on one of those late mornings, as the sky threatened drizzle, that she saw him. He was standing outside a cafe on Fremont Street, holding a phone in one hand, a coffee in the other, and wearing the kind of coat that could pay for a week's worth of food. Tall, clean-shaven, expensive watch. His eyes flicked upward from his phone and met hers, just for a second. Not the usual pitying glance or condescending smile. Just a calm, almost curious gaze. Then he turned back to his phone. Emily returned to her drawing. But the brief moment stuck with her. She had seen eyes like his before, in one of her sketches. The one with the boy on the swing. By evening, the sky had turned an iron gray. A light rain had started, not enough to send people running but enough to soak through worn shoes. Emily huddled beneath a narrow stone ledge outside a bank, trying to stay dry. She flipped through her notebook to a clean page and began sketching the man's face, not because she wanted to, but because her hand moved as if it had no choice. That night, curled beneath her blanket, the pendant resting against her chest, Emily whispered softly to herself. "He looked at me. Like he knew me." The city hummed around her, buses hissing, sirens wailing in the distance, a bottle breaking somewhere far away. But she felt a shift. Something unspoken, intangible, had cracked the routine of her invisibility. And though she couldn't know it yet, that momentary glance, exchanged in the middle of the rushing world, had already set everything in motion. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the rain would fall harder. Tomorrow, she would run toward the same man again. And the little pendant would change both their lives forever. The morning rain turned into a steady, gray downpour by early afternoon. Emily had taken shelter beneath the overhang of a closed print shop near Montgomery Street. Her blanket was damp, and her notebook was tucked safely beneath her hoodie to keep the pages from warping. It was colder than usual, the kind of chill that crept into her bones and stayed there, no matter how tightly she curled into herself. Around 2 o'clock, the streets began to thin. Pedestrians ducked into buildings or raised umbrellas. The sound of tires slicing through wet asphalt echoed between the buildings. Emily shifted, trying to keep her shoes away from the growing puddle beside her. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she had learned to ignore that. Hunger was a quiet, persistent companion, always nearby, never loud. Then she saw him again. The man from the cafe. He came out of a glass tower, moving quickly, head down, one hand shielding his phone from the rain as he tapped furiously on the screen. His hair was slightly damp at the edges, and his long coat, tailored and sleek, flapped as he jogged toward a waiting black car. As he reached the sidewalk, his foot caught the edge of a raised concrete slab. His body pitched forward sharply. Emily didn't think. She sprang up, crossed the street without checking for cars, and reached him just in time to catch his elbow and steady him. His phone clattered to the ground. The car waiting at the curb honked once before pulling forward to circle the block. He looked at her, startled, his hands instinctively checking his coat and pockets. When his eyes met hers, recognition flickered, not of her face exactly, but of something beneath it, something familiar he couldn't place. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice firm despite the nervous flutter in her chest. He blinked. Yeah, I didn't see that. Thanks." Rain trickled down the side of his face. She was holding his arm longer than necessary, and she let go quickly, stepping back. The silence between them hung heavy, filled only by the rhythmic tapping of rain on the sidewalk. He reached down to pick up his phone, but she crouched first, handing it to him without a word. His fingers brushed hers, and for a moment, she thought he might ask who she was, where she came from. But he only took the phone, nodded, and stood. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached under her hoodie, pulling the necklace from beneath the fabric. The pendant dangled in the open air, spinning slowly on its chain. "This is yours," she said. His expression changed instantly. The casual thanks vanished from his face. He looked at the pendant like it had slapped him. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, voice lower now. Emily stepped forward and placed the necklace gently into his hand. His fingers curled around the pendant, hesitantly, like he was touching something sacred. "I think it belonged to someone you knew," she said quietly. "My mom gave it to me." She said, "It used to be important." He turned it over, eyes narrowing. The small silver disc caught the gray light. There was a faint inscription etched along the inside curve, words worn by time, but still legible. "Forever, Ellie." He stopped breathing. "Ellie," he said aloud, so softly it was almost a whisper. His thumb traced the curve of the pendant. "Where did you get this?" "I told you. My mom gave it to me." "What was her name?" he asked, his voice tight. "Eleanor Carter." The name was a thunderclap. His posture shifted. His shoulders dropped slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked down at the pendant again, then back at Emily, as if seeing her for the first time. "You said, your name is Emily. Emily Carter." He stepped back, visibly shaken, water dripping from his sleeves now. The rain didn't seem to matter anymore. "I knew her," he said finally. "A long time ago. Eleanor, she used to work for my family." Emily tilted her head. "You knew my mom?" He nodded slowly, lips parted, eyes unfocused. "She took care of me. After my mom died, she was the only person who..." He stopped himself, eyes locking on Emily's again. "I haven't seen her in years." "What happened to her?" Emily looked down, her voice tightening. "She died. 2 years ago." He didn't speak. Just held the pendant tighter. The car returned, pulling up silently behind him, but he didn't notice. His mind was somewhere else, caught in a memory too heavy to carry and too important to let go. "Do you..." he hesitated. "Would you mind coming inside for a moment? To get out of the rain? I think we should talk." Emily hesitated. Strangers offering warmth had never meant safety in her world. But there was something about the way he held the necklace, something about the way he said her mother's name, that made her trust him, just a little. She nodded. They stepped into the building he had come from, a high-rise of steel and glass, the kind where the air smelled like money and the silence echoed. The front desk security glanced up, ready to question her, but the man held up a hand. "She's with me." The guard didn't protest. They rode the elevator to the 27th floor. Neither spoke. Emily felt the heat of the building seep into her skin as the water from her hoodie dripped onto the marble floor. She clutched her notebook tighter, unsure of what she was stepping into. The doors opened to a sleek office with tall windows and minimalist furniture. He gestured for her to sit on a long leather bench near the window while he removed his coat. "I'm Daniel," he said, finally. Daniel Whitmore. The name meant nothing to her. He poured hot water into a mug and handed it to her, then pulled a small blanket from a cabinet and offered it without a word. She accepted both, cautiously. They sat in silence for a minute. "How did you end up with the necklace?" he asked again, gently. "My mom gave it to me when I was little. Said it was special. Said someone gave it to her when she was young. Someone who mattered." His voice cracked. "I gave that to her." Emily looked up sharply. "I was 8 years old," he said. "I'd saved my allowance for 3 months. She was more than just a nanny. She was the only person who talked to me like I mattered. After my mom died, my dad disappeared into business. But Ellie, she never made me feel alone." Emily blinked. "She never told me about you," she said. He nodded slowly. "She probably wasn't allowed to." A long silence stretched between them. "I thought this was just a coincidence," Daniel said. "But it's not, is it?" She didn't answer. She wasn't sure what it meant. But she could feel something inside her shifting, like a door opening that had always been locked. "Can I ask where you live?" he asked, not unkindly. Emily hesitated. "Nowhere. I sleep wherever I can." Daniel nodded, but something behind his eyes darkened. "Look, I don't want to scare you. And I'm not asking you to trust me. But I think this means something. More than either of us realized." Emily watched him carefully, searching his face for signs of insincerity. There were none. He reached into his desk and pulled out the necklace again, still in his hand since the street. He laid it gently on the table between them. "I think we should figure this out," he said quietly. Together. The rain tapped softly on the windows behind them. Far below, the streets of San Francisco buzzed on, unaware of the meeting that was beginning to change two lives in ways neither of them yet understood. Daniel had barely slept that night. After Emily left his office, bundled in the blanket and holding the hot drink like it was made of gold, she'd vanished into the city's maze once again. She hadn't accepted any money or offer of help, not yet. But she'd left him with the pendant, as if trusting him to figure something out. He had promised to meet her the next day, same spot, same time. He didn't realize how heavy a pendant could feel until he held it alone in the silence of his penthouse apartment. The little silver disc sat in his palm under the warm light of his living room, and every time he flipped it over, the inscription pulled at something buried deep in his chest. "Forever, Ellie." It wasn't just the words. It was the handwriting. Daniel remembered how he had asked the jeweler to copy the note he'd scribbled on a napkin at age 8. It had been sloppy, barely legible, and yet it was etched perfectly onto that tiny disc. That pendant wasn't just a memory, it was proof. Proof that Eleanor Carter had kept it all those years. Proof that she had meant what she'd said when she whispered goodbye and promised she'd always care for him, no matter where life took them. But what Daniel hadn't expected was the tiny, almost invisible seam he found along the edge of the pendant while running his thumb over it. At first, he thought it was damage from time or weather. But when he took a closer look, he realized it wasn't damage at all. It was a compartment. He retrieved a precision tool kit from his desk and carefully twisted the pendant along the seam. After a moment of resistance, the disc gave a soft click and split open, revealing a thin, folded scrap of paper hidden inside. His breath caught. He unfolded it gently. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's, slanted and elegant, always in cursive, the way she used to write shopping lists and notes for his lunchbox. He read the note once, then twice. Then a third time. Daniel. If you ever find this, it means life has brought us back together in some impossible way. There are things I never told you. Things I couldn't. If Emily is with you, protect her. I kept her safe as long as I could, but the truth about where she came from, it was never mine to fully explain. Ask your father. Ask him what happened in the spring of 1993. Forgive me. Ellie. Daniel dropped into the chair behind him, the note shaking in his hands. The year haunted him immediately. 1993. That was the year his mother had died. The year everything had fallen apart. The year Eleanor had suddenly become more than a nanny, she had become the only constant in his life. And yet, by the following year, she was gone too. No explanation. Just vanished. He'd never questioned it then. Children don't question loss, they adapt to it, fold themselves around it like vines. But now it was different. Now it felt like the world had been keeping secrets from him all his life. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the corner of Fremont and Mission 10 minutes early. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick and glistening. He scanned the sidewalks, hands in his coat pockets, heart tight with anticipation. Emily appeared 5 minutes later, her hoodie pulled up, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. She walked toward him without hesitation this time. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Do you have it?" "I do. And there's something inside it." She tilted her head. "Inside?" He opened his palm and showed her the pendant, now slightly open, the tiny hinge exposed. There was a note. "From your mom." Emily froze. He handed it to her, letting her take her time. She unfolded the paper carefully, her eyes scanning the writing. Her face changed gradually, confusion, then tension, and finally a look Daniel recognized from the mirror. The look of someone realizing they had never truly known the whole story of their life. "She never talked about the past," Emily said. "Not really. Just pieces. Little stories about a garden, a dog named Baxter, a tree swing. I thought maybe she made them up to make me feel like I had something to hold on to." "She didn't," Daniel said quietly. "That was our backyard." Emily looked up sharply. "There's something else," he added. She mentioned a specific year. 1993. "And she told me to ask my father." "Do you still talk to him?" "Barely. He retired years ago. Moved up north. We're not close." She tucked the note into her sketchbook, then crossed her arms. "So what are you going to do?" Daniel hesitated. "I think we should find out what he knows." Emily stared at him for a long time. "We? You don't have to come," he added quickly. "But this is about you too." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I want to know. Whatever it is." Later that afternoon, they boarded a private car and began the drive toward Marin County, where Richard Whitmore lived in quiet, forced seclusion in a large home built into the redwoods. The journey was mostly silent. Emily watched the passing trees, her fingers twitching as if they wanted to draw what her heart couldn't explain. Daniel, meanwhile, rehearsed a dozen conversations in his mind. None felt right. By the time they arrived, the sky had turned pale and the light was fading. Richard Whitmore's estate was modest by billionaire standards, but still cold and imposing. Steel gates, tall hedges, stone walls. Daniel rang the bell twice before the old man finally appeared at the door, a heavy cardigan over his shirt, his face tired but sharp. "Daniel," he said, unimpressed. "To what do I owe the surprise?" "I need to talk to you," Daniel replied. It's important. Richard's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to his son. And who's this? Daniel didn't answer. He stepped forward. Do you remember Eleanor Carter? The name landed like a rock through glass. Richard's posture stiffened. Why are you asking about her? Because I found something. Or rather, someone. Emily stepped forward. I'm her daughter. Silence. Utter silence. Richard's face went pale, then flushed, then hardened. I think you know more than you ever told me, Daniel said. Specifically about 1993. Richard turned away without a word and disappeared inside the house. Daniel followed without waiting for an invitation. Emily hesitated at the threshold, then stepped in. The truth was no longer something that could be hidden. And Richard Whitmore, for the first time in decades, would be forced to remember the choices he'd made, and the consequences that had finally come home. The Whitmore estate was eerily quiet. Emily followed Daniel through the grand stone entryway, her footsteps tentative against the cold tile floor. The house had the feel of a forgotten museum, tall ceilings, antique furniture, and walls lined with paintings that seemed to judge anyone who dared walk past them. Everything was curated and controlled, yet it all felt hollow, as though no one had laughed or lived there in years. Daniel moved with a determination that made Emily feel like she was intruding on something sacred and dangerous. The two of them caught up with Richard in the study, where the older man stood at a large wooden liquor cabinet, pouring a drink with a hand that trembled slightly. The fire crackled in the hearth behind him, casting long shadows across the room. I hoped this would never come back, Richard said, without turning. That part of my life was buried for a reason. Daniel stood near the edge of the desk, arms crossed. Well, it didn't stay buried. Not for me. Not for her. Richard finally turned, glass in hand. He looked directly at Emily now, his expression unreadable. How much do you know? He asked. Emily didn't flinch. Only what she told me before she died. Which wasn't much. Richard let out a slow breath. He sat down heavily in a worn leather chair and took a sip of his drink. 1993, he said, as if confirming the timestamp of a sealed file in his mind. Your mother came to me that spring. She was scared. Desperate. And she was pregnant. Daniel's head turned sharply toward Emily, then back to his father. You're saying? No, Richard interrupted. The child wasn't mine. I hadn't seen Eleanor in months. But what she told me that day, it wasn't about who the father was. It was about where she had been. What had happened? He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She had been working for a private household in San Mateo, part-time, to make extra money. They were a well-known family with connections to a fertility clinic. Apparently, there was a mix-up. Something about an insemination procedure gone wrong. Confidentiality agreements. Lawyers. She didn't give me names, but she was terrified. She said someone was trying to make the problem disappear. Quietly. Daniel frowned. And you didn't ask more? You didn't help her? I gave her money, Richard said flatly. Enough to leave the city. She didn't want to run, but she was protecting something. Someone. Emily stood very still. Me. Richard nodded once. Yes. You. She looked down, hands tightening on her sketchbook. And you just let her go? I was protecting my family, Richard said. The Whitmore name was already under enough scrutiny after your mother died. The company couldn't afford a scandal. Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp. So you paid off the only person who ever cared about me, and then erased her like she was nothing? Richard's jaw clenched. Don't pretend you understand what it's like to have a legacy to protect. Daniel's voice rose. I don't care about legacies. I care about people. Emily didn't say a word. Her mind raced. This wasn't the story she'd grown up believing, if it could even be called a story. Her mother had left out nearly everything. The garden, the swing, the dog, those had been scraps of a life stolen from her. And now, the man sitting in front of her was admitting, with perfect composure, that he had knowingly played a part in forcing them into the shadows. "Do you know who her real father was?" Daniel asked. Richard shook his head. "No. She wouldn't tell me. She only said the records were sealed. She believed someone tampered with the files at the clinic to cover it up. She was trying to trace the truth herself." Daniel turned to Emily. "Do you still have her things?" She nodded. "Just a few. Her old coat. A journal. A box of letters I never opened. We should go through them. Maybe there's something she left behind. A name. A document." Richard stood up slowly. "You're walking into a storm, Daniel. You dig too deep, and you'll find out why some truths are buried." Daniel looked at him without blinking. "If you're worried about damage to the Whitmore name, don't be. I already know exactly what it stands for." Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out of the study. Emily followed him, but not before pausing at the doorway to glance back at the man who could have changed her life with a single choice. He didn't look at her. They drove back to the city in silence. The sun had set, and the streets shimmered with neon reflections and headlight trails. Emily stared out the window, her thoughts heavy and disoriented. The note, the pendant secret, and now this. Her past was unfolding piece by piece, and yet it all still felt like it belonged to someone else. Back at Daniel's apartment, he handed her a towel, a warm sweater, and a seat at the kitchen table. She accepted them silently. He poured tea, set a plate of toast in front of her, then sat across with his laptop. "I've already started checking court records tied to the clinic," he said. "If there was a case, something sealed, there may still be traces." Emily pulled her sketchbook into her lap but didn't open it. "Do you believe her? Eleanor, I mean. About the clinic, the mix-up?" "I do," Daniel said. "She never lied to me. Not once. If she said something happened, I believe it did." "I wish I remembered more," Emily whispered. "But I was too young. We'll figure it out. Together." She nodded slowly. Then, cautiously, she slid her backpack forward and opened it. Inside was a faded red journal, the leather cracked at the edges. She placed it on the table. "My mom's," she said. "She never let me read it. I haven't tried since she died." Daniel reached for it but paused. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded again. They opened the journal together. The first few pages were blank. Then came lists, grocery items, addresses, dates. Further in, there were longer entries. Fragments of thoughts, letters never sent. Notes scribbled in rushed cursive. Then they found it. A name. St. Gabriel Women's Wellness Center, Daniel read aloud. "San Mateo." Emily leaned in. "That's it, isn't it?" He nodded. "It has to be." He snapped a picture of the page, already searching the center's name online. "It closed 12 years ago," he murmured. "But the building still exists. And if we're lucky, the medical records weren't destroyed." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You think they'd still have them? They're required to store records for at least 20 years. If someone didn't erase them illegally, they could still be somewhere." She leaned back, suddenly exhausted. "What if we find out something worse?" Daniel looked up from the screen. "Then we deal with it. One piece at a time." The fire from the pendant had become a path now. And neither of them could turn back. The following morning, the sky over San Francisco was clear, a rare and almost unsettling calm after so many days of fog and drizzle. Daniel sat by the window in his office, the journal from Eleanor still open on the desk in front of him. He'd already made 2 calls, one to his legal team, and another to a private investigator he trusted. Both were now digging for anything they could find on the defunct St. Gabriel Women's Wellness Center in San Mateo. Emily was in the next room, curled on the sofa, flipping through the pages of her sketchbook but not really drawing. She hadn't spoken much since they'd returned from Marin County. Whatever hope she had begun to build after meeting Daniel was now tangled in the revelations of the previous day. There was no easy resolution. Only questions layered upon more questions. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel's phone rang. Daniel Whitmore, he answered quickly. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Evelyn Park, the investigator you hired. I have something." Daniel straightened. "Go on." The building that once housed St. Gabriel was bought by a real estate development firm in 2013. The records of the clinic's patients were legally transferred to a medical storage facility outside Sacramento. I already contacted them. There's a backlog, and most requests take days, but I may be able to expedite it. I'll need the full name and approximate dates of the treatment. Daniel glanced toward the journal again. Eleanor Carter. Treatment year likely 1993. I'll push it through, Evelyn said. You'll hear from me by the end of the day. He hung up, stepped into the living room, and relayed the information to Emily. Her only response was a slow nod. She wasn't getting her hopes up, not yet. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the skyline, and a courier arrived at Daniel's door with a heavy manila envelope, hand-delivered from Sacramento. Inside were several photocopied documents, some typed, some handwritten, and a worn hospital intake form dated April 4, 1993. Daniel and Emily sat side by side at the dining table, the envelope's contents spread out between them. The silence in the room was tense and electric. The first few pages were standard intake forms. Name, date of birth, insurance information. Then came a consent form for assisted reproductive procedures. Emily leaned in, her brow furrowed. This isn't from my mother, she said slowly. Look, this name isn't hers. Daniel squinted at the typed line, patient, Anna Whitmore. His blood ran cold. My mother, he said quietly. Anna was my mother. Emily looked at him, stunned. Daniel flipped the page, and his eyes landed on a scanned image of a genetic profile summary. The form listed 2 donors, Donor A, Anna Whitmore. Donor B, Eleanor Carter. That's not possible, Daniel whispered. She was a donor? Emily asked. Daniel shook his head. No. She must have been a surrogate. Or, wait. This says there was a clerical error. Look here. He pointed to a section at the bottom. It was a note from a clinic supervisor, dated 2 months after the procedure, erroneous insemination acknowledged. Donor material misfiled under incorrect client profile. Patient notified. Confidential settlement issued. All records sealed. Emily sat back, her eyes wide. So, I was born because of this mistake? Daniel nodded slowly. It wasn't just a mistake. It was covered up. That's why your mom ran. That's why she kept you hidden. They were both quiet for a long time. Then Emily whispered, Does this mean, your mom is my mom? Daniel looked at her, struggling to find the words. Biologically? Yes. If this is correct, we share the same mother. Emily covered her mouth. Her eyes welled up, not from sadness, but from a storm of emotions she couldn't even name. Daniel reached for her hand. I didn't expect this either. But it's real. And it changes everything. She nodded slowly, her grip tightening around his fingers. They continued sorting through the documents, now with more purpose. Toward the bottom of the stack was a small, creased photograph. It showed 2 women standing in front of a large oak tree. One was unmistakably Eleanor, younger and glowing with the quiet confidence Emily remembered from childhood. The other woman, elegant, with the same angular jaw and deep-set eyes as Daniel, was clearly Anna Whitmore. On the back of the photo, in delicate cursive, was a single phrase, For the life we chose to protect. Emily turned the photo over again. They knew each other. Daniel nodded. More than that. They cared about each other. Maybe even loved each other. Emily studied the photo. Do you think your dad knew? Daniel didn't answer right away. If he did, he never let it show. A thought struck Emily. What if he found out about the mistake and didn't just push Eleanor away? What if he was part of the cover-up? Daniel's expression darkened. It wouldn't surprise me. He always treated reputation like it was more important than people. Emily stared at the photo again. They tried to protect me. Daniel placed the image gently on the table. And now it's our turn to protect what they gave us. That night, Daniel cleared out an old cabinet in his office and began creating a file, meticulously labeled, organized, preserved. Every piece of evidence, every page, every memory. Emily helped, silently arranging the documents, pressing them flat, smoothing the edges. By midnight, the file was thick. It wasn't complete. But it was something. The beginning of truth. Before bed, Daniel placed the original pendant in a small glass case beside his mother's framed photograph. The inscription still gleamed softly beneath the lamp's light. Emily stood at the door, watching. She'd be proud of you, she said. Daniel turned. She'd be proud of you too. And for the first time since this began, Emily smiled. Not a cautious one. Not the wary, guarded curve of lips she wore around strangers. A real one. The next morning, the sky over San Francisco had turned overcast again, as if the weather itself had grown wary of how deep Daniel and Emily were digging. But neither of them cared. The file they had assembled the night before now rested on Daniel's desk, a quiet, undeniable archive of truth. Yet for all it contained, there was still one piece missing. One voice that had been present through it all but remained silent. Richard Whitmore. Daniel stared at the manila folder as he sat at the edge of his desk. Across the room, Emily watched him silently. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, not from cold but from tension. You think he knew everything? She asked finally. Daniel didn't answer right away. If he didn't know from the start, he found out later. He had to. Then why let her run? Why not? I don't know, step in? Daniel stood, pushing a hand through his hair. Because for him, the Whitmore name is sacred. Protecting it always came first. Even if it meant pretending people didn't exist. Emily nodded slowly. So what now? Daniel glanced at the file again. Now we go back. This time, he doesn't get to walk away. 2 hours later, they were in the car again, driving north along the winding roads that led into the forested edge of Marin County. Daniel drove with one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the file. Emily sat beside him, silent, but more composed than she'd been before. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had questions, and now, she deserved answers. Richard opened the door with a tired scowl, not even feigning politeness this time. I thought we were done with this, he said. We're not, Daniel replied, stepping past him without waiting for permission. Emily followed. They returned to the study, and Daniel placed the folder on the table between them like it was evidence in a courtroom. I have copies of records from St. Gabriel, he said. Intake forms, donor files, even clinic notes. Richard's eyes barely flicked to the folder. What do you expect me to do with that? Tell the truth, Daniel said. About how long you've known. About what you did after Eleanor left. Richard moved to the bar, poured himself a drink, something dark, probably older than either of them, and sat in his usual chair. I knew the clinic had been involved in a lawsuit, he said slowly. I remember your mother being distraught for weeks, even before her health started to decline. She wouldn't talk about it. But I saw the name Eleanor Carter appear in one of her personal notes once. Daniel tensed. You never thought to tell me? It was irrelevant, Richard snapped. You were a child. She was gone. There was no point in stirring ghosts. She wasn't a ghost, Daniel shot back. She was protecting your granddaughter. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. Richard blinked once. You're certain? Daniel opened the file and laid the documents out. The DNA would confirm it, but yes. Eleanor was the gestational carrier. Biologically, Emily is your wife's daughter. Which makes her my daughter's half-sister, Richard said flatly. No, Emily cut in. Your granddaughter. The word hung in the air like a stone dropped in still water. Richard leaned back slowly, taking a long sip of his drink. If what you're saying is true, he said, then this entire situation was the result of a procedural error. A lab mistake. That mistake gave me a sister, Daniel said. It gave her a life she was never supposed to fight for alone. And instead of helping, you erased it. I made decisions based on what I believed was best, Richard said, his voice quieter now. For the family. For the company. Your mother had just died. The last thing we needed was another scandal. Emily stepped closer to the desk. So you paid Eleanor to vanish? I offered her security, Richard replied. She accepted. No, she had no choice, Emily said. She had a baby and no protection. You gave her silence disguised as charity. Richard looked up at her. There was no anger in his face now. Only something older, fatigue, maybe. Or shame. Do you want an apology? He asked. No, Daniel said. We want acknowledgement. You knew. You let her disappear. And you let me grow up thinking I'd lost everyone. I thought I was doing what fathers do, Richard said. Protecting what mattered. You weren't protecting us, Daniel replied. You were protecting yourself. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Outside, the wind had picked up. Richard's glass was nearly empty. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it down. You'll go public with this? I haven't decided, Daniel admitted. That's not why we came. Then why? Emily stepped forward. Because I want to know where I come from. Not from clinics or forums or whispers in the dark. From people who were there. From people who chose to look away. Richard nodded once. Then I'll tell you what I remember. For the next hour, he spoke, haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity. He recalled the days after Anna's visit to the clinic. How the mistake had come to light. How his wife had wanted to raise the child, but the legal mess surrounding the insemination, and the fact that Eleanor had been working in their household, created a scandal they feared would ruin everything. So Anna had written Eleanor a letter. Offered her everything, money, relocation, legal support, but no public connection. She loved you, Richard told Emily. In the only way she knew how, from a distance. It broke her. Emily's face was unreadable. She died before she could change it, Richard added. And I didn't have the strength to undo what had already been done. Daniel stood. Then it's our turn now. To set it right. As they left the house, the wind cut through the trees, sharp and cold. Daniel walked slightly ahead, but Emily paused at the gate, looking back one last time at the house that held so many of the secrets that shaped her. She didn't hate Richard. Not exactly. But she didn't pity him either. Some truths come too late to heal what's been broken, but not too late to reveal what has always been buried. And for the first time, she wasn't walking away with nothing. She was walking away with the truth. It was nearly midnight by the time they returned to San Francisco. The city lights shimmered against the black surface of the bay, and the distant hum of traffic echoed between the buildings like a lullaby for the sleepless. Daniel parked the car in the private garage beneath his building, then glanced at Emily, who had barely spoken during the drive. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry. She sat perfectly still, her sketchbook unopened in her lap, her face set with the kind of quiet stillness that wasn't empty, it was full. Full of things she hadn't found words for yet. Daniel didn't try to break the silence. Instead, he walked beside her to the elevator and waited as the car ascended, floor by floor, until they reached the apartment. Inside, the warmth greeted them. The subtle scent of old paper and cinnamon from the tea they'd left steeping earlier still lingered in the air. Emily dropped her bag by the entryway and moved straight to the window, where she stared out at the glowing skyline. Daniel, watching her from the kitchen, finally spoke. "We can slow down, if you need to." Emily didn't turn around. "I don't want to slow down. I just want to understand what happens next." "I don't have all the answers," he admitted. "Neither do I," she said. "But I'm not waiting around to be invisible again." Daniel stepped closer. "Then let's start small. Something real. Something that puts us on the right path." Emily turned to face him. "Like what?" "I want to help you," Daniel said, sitting down. "Not because of guilt, or responsibility, or any of the Whitmore family nonsense, but because you're you. And you deserve better than what you've been given." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Help me how?" He didn't flinch. "Let me take you to the hospital. We get the DNA test. It won't change what we already know, but it'll make things official. It's not about proving anything to us, it's about making sure no one else can ever question it." Emily thought for a moment, then nodded once. "Okay." The next morning, they visited a private clinic in the Marina district. Daniel had made the appointment the night before, using only his first name to avoid attention. The test was quick, just a simple cheek swab for both of them, and the doctor assured them the results would be expedited. Back in the car, Daniel offered to take her anywhere she wanted. "You hungry?" he asked. "There's a place in North Beach that does the best grilled cheese you've ever had." "I'm not really hungry," she said. "Can we go somewhere else?" "Name it." She hesitated. "There's a building near the Mission. An old church. My mom used to sit on the steps there when she wanted to feel close to people without having to talk to anyone." Daniel nodded and turned the car toward the neighborhood. When they arrived, Emily stepped out quietly and walked up the steps of the faded, graffiti-tagged church. It wasn't open, but the benches outside were dry. She sat and looked up at the stained glass windows, colors muted by time and dust. Daniel sat beside her without saying anything. "She used to tell me stories about angels," Emily said softly. "Said they weren't what people thought. Not shining or perfect or even all that gentle. Just persistent. They didn't stop showing up." Daniel rested his elbows on his knees. "Sounds about right." They sat there for nearly an hour. A few people passed by, some glancing curiously, most ignoring them. But Emily didn't mind. It was the first place that felt familiar since her mother's death, first in memory, now in presence. When they finally returned to the apartment that evening, a message was waiting. Daniel checked his phone, then looked at her. "The results are in." He handed her the screen. Emily read the email once, then again. "Probability of biological sibling match, 99.98%. She set the phone down gently. "So it's official," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." She didn't cry, and neither did he. But something shifted between them. An invisible thread that had already been tying them together suddenly pulled taut. "I don't know what to do with it," she admitted. "You don't have to know today," he said. "We just keep going. One step at a time." Later that night, Daniel stood on the balcony while Emily slept in the guest room, now made warm with soft lighting and a stack of books he'd pulled from his old shelves. The wind off the bay was cool, and the city blinked below like a circuit board in the dark. He held the pendant in his hand again. This time, he wasn't thinking of the past, or of Eleanor's note, or of the clinic's cold, printed records. He was thinking of the future. He opened his laptop and pulled up the foundation documents he'd begun drafting months ago, plans for a housing initiative that had been shelved when other projects demanded attention. But now, he saw it differently. Not just as charity. Not just as a statement. But as a first step toward restoring something long ignored. He renamed the file at the top of the document, Ellie's Way. It wasn't about building a monument to her or even a legacy for himself. It was about giving children like Emily, children like he had been, a path back into the world. The next morning, Emily found him still working, blueprints spread out across the table, a list of architects and social workers already forming in the margin. "You didn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't want to," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "This is too important." She sat down across from him, glancing at the heading on the page. "Ellie's Way?" He nodded. "It's going to be more than shelters. We'll provide mentorship, therapy, art programs, education tracks. Not just a roof, but an actual chance." She stared at him, something flickering in her expression. "I want to help," she said. Daniel looked up. "You sure?" "I want to draw the walls," she said. "Not just decorate. Design. Places that don't feel like punishment. Places that don't feel like temporary waiting rooms for broken kids." He smiled, not wide, not theatrical, just a simple nod that said yes, this is exactly right. And in that moment, they weren't strangers. They weren't billionaire and runaway. They were just two kids who had lived in silence for too long, finally learning how to speak, first to each other, and soon, to the world. The momentum from the previous days had made everything feel inevitable, like the puzzle of their lives was falling into place, piece by delicate piece. Emily was staying at Daniel's apartment now, not as a guest, but as something slowly forming into family. She didn't ask for anything, but Daniel had begun anticipating her needs, a warm drink before she reached for her sketchbook, a new pack of pencils left casually on the table, small things that didn't feel like charity. Then came the message. A phone call from the clinic. Daniel answered first, listening intently as the administrator read the final verification aloud. His eyes didn't move from Emily, who was sitting on the floor nearby, organizing her drawings for the Ellie's Way proposal. The sunlight made her look almost golden. He hung up. Emily looked up immediately. Was that them? Daniel hesitated. It was. She stood slowly. What did they say? There was a pause. Then he said it. It's negative. Emily's expression didn't change at first. The words were too strange to land. What do you mean? Daniel cleared his throat. The DNA test. It confirmed we're not related. At least, not through my mother. Emily didn't blink. That doesn't make sense. I know, he said. But the lab ran it twice. They checked the chain of custody. It's final. She sat down hard on the edge of the couch. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Everything, the documents, the clinic records, the pendant, the note, had pointed toward a connection. They had lived inside that possibility like it was a room they were slowly furnishing together. Now, the walls had collapsed. So what am I? She whispered. Daniel moved to sit beside her. Emily. What am I to you? She asked again, more sharply now. You're still you, he said gently. That doesn't change. She shook her head. You don't get it. I thought I belonged somewhere. That this, us, was real. But now I'm just a mistake again. A misfiled name in a broken system. Stop, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. You are not a mistake. She stood. Then why does it feel like I was never supposed to be here? He didn't have an answer. Emily grabbed her backpack, the one that had once held her life when she lived on the street, and began stuffing her things inside. Sketchbook. Pencils. The sweater he'd given her. The necklace. Daniel rose. What are you doing? I need air, she said. I can't be here right now. You don't have to leave. I do. There was no anger in her voice, only panic. Quiet and cold. She didn't slam the door when she left. That would have been easier to respond to. Instead, the door closed with a soft click, like the last page of a book she'd decided not to finish reading. Daniel stood frozen in the quiet that followed. The apartment felt bigger now, and unbearably still. He looked at the pendant, now resting on the table, and realized just how quickly hope could unravel when the thread was pulled. Hours passed. Daniel made a few calls, none returned. He drove to the cafe on Fremont Street. Nothing. He checked the old print shop, the underpass where she'd once slept, the church steps in the mission. She wasn't at any of them. He even visited the shelter where she used to stay, a modest facility tucked into a forgotten corner of the Tenderloin. A weary volunteer at the front desk offered only a shrug. Haven't seen her in days. She's hard to track. You know how some kids are, ghosts when they want to be. Daniel left his number anyway. That night, he sat alone on the balcony, wind whipping at his sleeves, staring out at a city that had swallowed someone he'd promised to protect. He replayed the moment over and over, his words, her silence, the way her hands had trembled slightly as she packed. And beneath it all was the cruelest question, had she been right? Had he wanted to help her only because he thought she was part of his family? Would he still care now? He hated that the question even existed. The next day, Daniel walked into the Ellie's Way Foundation office for the first time as more than just a name on the paperwork. The building was a modest brownstone on the edge of Soma, not yet renovated. But inside, he met with the architects and project managers he'd handpicked. He spoke not with the polished detachment of a billionaire but with the urgency of someone who had something to prove. He showed them Emily's sketches. "This is the tone," he said. "The walls, the light, the feeling. We don't build shelters. We build spaces that speak." A few nodded. One of them, an older designer, studied the pages with care. "She's got vision," the woman said. "Where is she?" Daniel didn't answer. Later that evening, back at his apartment, he sat at the kitchen counter staring at his phone. Her contact stared back, Emily Carter. No reply. He left one more message, his voice quiet, steady. "Emily. I don't care what the test says. You are still the most real thing I've found in a long time. This apartment is too quiet without your sketches taped to the wall. I miss you. That's it. Just, call me if you can." Then he set the phone down and waited. Not for confirmation. Not for proof. But for the return of something that had become more important than biology ever could. Emily did not sleep that night. She drifted between cafes and city corners, hiding where she could and keeping the pendant close, the last physical link to everything she had built her hope around. She sketched on scraps of napkins sometimes, but mostly she watched the world from the fringes, the same way she always had, seeing, but unseen. Daniel woke to the emptiness of the apartment. His phone lay silent. The sketches she'd taped to the wall were gone. On the kitchen counter, a mug sat half-filled, abandoned hours ago. He felt the absence like a wound. He had no idea how long she had been gone, or how far she might have wandered. He forced himself to move. He called the private investigator Evelyn again, asking for immediate help. He reviewed security footage from the streets and neighborhoods he knew she frequented. He even had building custodians check their stairwells, dumpsters, delivery alleys. He traced her possible patterns with desperation. Late afternoon, Evelyn called with news. A credit card transaction in Oakland, a small purchase, almost meaningless, but enough. Emily had appeared at a 24-hour convenience store in East Oakland. The time stamp, 3 a.m. Surveillance footage showed a girl matching her hoodie, hood up, entering and leaving minutes later. Daniel's heart sank and stirred at the same time. She was still somewhere. Not hidden entirely, not vanished completely. He got in his car and drove across the Bay Bridge. Rain threatened again overhead. He passed through East Oakland streets he barely recognized, clean lines of boarded shops and street lamps that flickered. He found the convenience store near a corner, lights still on, door slightly ajar. He rushed in. The clerk looked up lazily. Daniel asked if she'd been in that night. The man frowned. "Maybe. I didn't notice. A lot of people come and go here. Hoodies." He shook his head, unworried. Daniel pressed for more time, approximate looks, direction. The clerk remembered a red backpack. couldn't recall where she went after. Outside, Daniel stood on the curb, rain specks collecting on his shoulders. He whispered her name. No echo. No response. He paused, then pulled out his phone and typed. Emily. I know you're out there. I'm coming to find you, not to demand anything, but to tell you something the test never could. I care about you, in ways that don't need proofs. Let me find you before the city swallows you again. He didn't press send. He waited, then deleted. He locked his phone and put it in his pocket. Then he walked through the block, into alleys and near shuttered buildings, everywhere the rain had washed shadows. Meanwhile, Emily sat in a narrow corridor behind an old warehouse. The concrete was damp. Her knees tucked to her chest. She stared at her reflection in a small cracked window. Her face was pale, her eyes heavy with unshed tears. The world had whispered she belonged somewhere, then told her she never did. Her heartbeat pounded. She took the pendant in her hand and held it close, as if it could speak, as if it might still explain more than any DNA ever could. She would not admit defeat. That night, she would draw. She'd sketch a map of places she had felt safe, the church steps, the cafe awning, a corner near the mission building. She'd mark where Daniel had first seen her. She'd mark where Eleanor had stood in memories she barely remembered. As dawn's light crept across the city, she slipped out into the streets again, walking without aim but staying on the edges. She walked until she reached the bay. The tide was high, water pressing gently at the edge. She sat on a bench overlooking the shimmering expanse, her hoodie soaked and limp, the wind biting at her face. She thought of Daniel. She thought of Eleanor. She thought of announced truths and rejections. She wept silently, because even when the test had said no, her heart had said yes. She wept because the path she had hoped to walk with him felt suddenly broken. But she wept too because the path she walked now, alone, was not new. It had always been hers. Back in Oakland, Daniel's calls to shelters, hospitals, and homeless outreach groups turned up no reliable sightings. But one volunteer worker, an older woman who helped teenagers in crisis, mentioned a name. A girl matching that description was seen near the ferry terminal, asking for water and directions. He flew across again. At the ferry terminal, Daniel walked slowly among benches and waiting passengers. The smell of salt water and diesel layered with the hush of early evening. He looked for a red backpack, a sketchbook, something familiar. At the edge of the ferry's waiting area, he spotted a girl. Hood up, head down. She looked smaller than his memory. He approached quietly. Emily? He asked. Her body jerked at the sound. She turned her face away. I'm not here to fight, he said softly. I just want to listen. She hesitated. Then stood and backed against a railing, staring across the water. Her voice was small. You should go. He shook his head. I can't do that. She looked up, eyes glistening. The test was wrong. Everything we thought. I know, he interrupted gently. But not everything we feel. Not everything that matters. She stared at him, breaths shallow. Raindrops began to fall again. A wind stirred the ferry ropes behind them. Why are you here? She asked. Because I didn't give up, he replied. And because the part of us that believed still matters. Her eyes flashed with pain. That's what I'm afraid of. That believing will hurt again. He stepped forward. Then I'll hold you through it. She looked at him, torn, hesitant, raw. The rain fell heavier. People shuffled under umbrellas. The ferry horn blew in the distance. She closed her eyes. He reached out gently. His hand hovered. Her eyes opened. She didn't step closer. But she didn't step away either. They stood in the rain, between water and sky, two people whose lives had collided at the locus of secrets, even as the city buzzed around them. Neither spoke. There was nothing immediate to say. But something subtle, something like possibility, breathed again between them. The rain had slowed to a mist, light enough to feel but not heavy enough to hide behind. Emily still hadn't spoken again, but she hadn't left either. That alone gave Daniel the smallest sliver of hope. They remained by the railing for a while, silent, letting the wind off the bay carry their thoughts farther than words could reach. Emily's sketchbook was clutched in her arms, damp but not damaged. Her fingers fidgeted with its corner, opening it slightly, closing it again. Daniel didn't ask what was inside. He just stayed. Eventually, she spoke. "I walked to every place I remembered my mom loving. But none of them felt right anymore." Daniel nodded. "I get that. I thought the pendant would be enough to find out who I was," she added. "But all it did was confuse everything more." Daniel didn't argue. "It brought us together. Even if it didn't explain everything." Emily gave a soft sound, half a sigh, half a laugh. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" He shook his head. "No. Hurt, maybe. Confused. But I'm glad we know the truth. Even if it wasn't the truth we were expecting." She looked down. "I wanted to be your sister. It made the world feel less accidental." Daniel placed a hand on the railing beside her, close but not quite touching. "You don't need DNA for that. Family isn't always about blood." She looked up at him then. Really looked. "I don't know what I am to you anymore." "You're Emily," he said simply. "That's more than enough." Her grip on the sketchbook loosened. "I kept drawing, even after I left. I thought maybe if I could put the right image on paper, it would explain how I felt." Daniel's eyes searched hers. "Did it work?" She opened the sketchbook and turned it toward him. The drawing was soft but detailed. It showed two figures on a bench, one older, one younger. Between them hung a pendant on a chain, caught midair as if in motion, like it had just been passed from one hand to the other. In the background, the Golden Gate Bridge faded into a swirling fog, a city skyline behind it, and a street lamp casting a small circle of light over their heads. Beneath it, in delicate script, she had written, "If I don't belong to the past, then maybe I can belong to the present." Daniel stared at it for a long time. "That's beautiful. I wasn't sure if I should show you." "I'm glad you did." She slowly closed the book. "I don't know if I can go back. Not just to the apartment. But to trying to figure out who I am again. It's exhausting." "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "Come back. Not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve to be somewhere safe." "I don't want to feel like a guest." "Then don't," he replied. "Come home." The word hung there. Home. Not a shelter. Not a friend's couch. Not a bench under a church window. But a place where she could exist without fear that someone would make her disappear again. Emily didn't respond immediately. But her shoulders relaxed, and the sketchbook slipped under her arm like it had finally found its place. They returned to the apartment late that night. There were no big declarations. No dramatic apologies. Just Emily setting her backpack down in the same corner, sitting at the same table, pulling out her same mug. The rhythm resumed, not where it had stopped, but somewhere forward from it. The next morning, Daniel had a surprise. He handed her a small, velvet box. "I had the pendant cleaned and restored," he explained. "I wasn't going to touch it without your permission, but I think it deserves a new chain." Emily opened the box slowly. Inside was the same pendant, now shining faintly, the inscription, "Forever, Ellie," still visible but no longer dulled by years of wear. The chain was delicate but strong, not flashy, just simple and sure. Daniel stood, uncertain. "You can say no." Instead, Emily removed the pendant from her pocket, the makeshift string she had tied it to fraying, and handed it to him. "Help me put it on?" He smiled, took the box, and gently fastened the necklace behind her neck. The pendant settled against her collarbone, light but grounding. For the first time since the test results, Emily smiled. Later that afternoon, Daniel called the foundation team to assemble. The Ellie's Way project had advanced quickly since his initial pitch, but now he wanted to go further. He didn't want to build only shelters, he wanted to build a network. A movement. One that reached schools, hospitals, art programs, and counseling centers. I want the first center to open in the Mission District, he told them. Close to where Emily grew up. It needs to be personal. Grounded. Emily sat quietly at the edge of the conference table, sketchbook open. The team began asking questions, budgets, schedules, permits. Then one of them turned to Emily. What do you think it should look like? She blinked. Me? Daniel nodded. You've seen more than most of us ever will. This place should feel like it's yours. Emily thought for a long moment. It should have a quiet room. Not just a bedroom, but a space where kids can draw or just breathe. No clocks, no pressure. Just silence. Done, the architect said, jotting it down. And no white walls, she added. They make everything feel like a hospital. What color, then? She glanced at Daniel, then at the page in front of her. Warm green. Like the kind you only see in parks right after it rains. The note was taken. That evening, after the meeting, Daniel and Emily sat on the balcony again. The wind was calmer now, less restless. You're building something big, she said. We are, he corrected. She looked at him. What happens when people ask who I am? I'll say you're the girl who gave me her only necklace and changed everything. And if they ask why? He smiled faintly. Because someone had to remind me what matters. She looked down at the pendant resting over her heart. Then I'll stay, she whispered. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. And in that quiet, she felt the shift, not a return to something old, but the arrival of something new. It started as a whisper. A low-profile journalist, digging into philanthropic ventures in the Bay Area, caught wind of the Ellie's Way project. What began as a routine piece on emerging nonprofit architecture shifted when the name Daniel Whitmore appeared repeatedly, not just as a sponsor, but as its visionary. A few discreet phone calls led to an unexpected thread. A girl, unnamed in the foundation's documentation, had reportedly influenced the entire design language of the project. She wasn't an architect or advisor. She wasn't a consultant. She was, according to a source, a formerly homeless teenager who now lived with Daniel Whitmore himself. Within 48 hours, it became impossible to contain. The first headline appeared quietly online, buried beneath clickbait and tech reviews. Billionaire Tech Air funds homeless initiative inspired by mysterious teen. Then the story spread. National outlets picked it up. Interviews were requested. Speculation ignited. Was the girl a runaway? A distant relative? A child from his past? People guessed, prodded, and twisted facts into fiction faster than anyone could correct them. Emily noticed it first. She came out of her room early one morning and found Daniel sitting at the kitchen counter, laptop open, jaw clenched, news alerts blinking across the screen. What is it? She asked. He turned the screen toward her. She read the headline. Slowly. Billionaire's secret connection to teen who lived on the streets, the hidden heir? Her stomach dropped. They think I'm your, what, secret child? They're reaching, Daniel muttered. They don't have the real story, so they're inventing one. Did someone leak it? Probably someone at the foundation. Or the permit office. Doesn't matter now. It's out. She backed away from the counter. Are they going to find out who I really am? Daniel closed the laptop gently. That depends on what we tell them. Emily looked down. Her voice was quiet. I don't want cameras following me. I don't want to be anyone's mystery. Daniel nodded. Then we control the story before it controls us. 2 days later, he scheduled an interview with one of the few journalists he still trusted, Amira Klein, a former investigative reporter turned documentary host. He met her in a neutral location, a quiet gallery space just outside the Mission District. Emily chose not to attend. She said she didn't want to be the subject of anyone else's lens, not yet. The cameras rolled. Daniel sat under soft lighting, wearing a charcoal sweater and no watch, his voice calm and grounded. "I didn't find her," he said. "She found me. I was on the sidewalk, rushing between meetings, and she stopped to help me when I fell. That was the moment everything changed. She gave me something that belonged to her mother, something from my past, something I thought I'd lost." Amira leaned in. "And that led you here?" "To rethinking everything I thought I knew about family. About responsibility. About what it means to belong." "Is she your sister?" the reporter asked, gently. Daniel paused. "No. Not biologically. But she's still family." Amira blinked. "That's not the answer I expected." "It's the truth." The segment aired in primetime. Social media exploded again, but this time, it was different. Hashtags trended, hashtag Ellie's Way, hashtag family is more, hashtag not just blood. People started sharing their own stories of chosen family, of reunions that happened without DNA, of mentorship, of found siblings, of kids they'd taken in and refused to give up on. Daniel didn't hide from the press. He walked into the noise and told them exactly what they hadn't asked to hear, that philanthropy without connection was nothing but performance. That children didn't need pity, they needed belonging. That money couldn't erase damage, but it could rebuild spaces where healing had a chance to start. He never used Emily's full name. He never showed her drawings or shared her sketches. But the world learned enough to know that a girl had once handed him a necklace, and it had become the weight that finally pulled him toward the truth. Meanwhile, Emily watched it all from the apartment, headphones on, not because she wanted silence, but because she needed to decide what her voice would sound like when she was finally ready to speak. When she left the apartment again, it was to visit a small classroom tucked into the lower floor of a youth center in Potrero Hill. Daniel had arranged for her to meet with a group of students, kids her age, some older, most familiar with streets, hunger, and shelters. She walked into the room nervously, sketchbook under her arm, hair tied back. A teacher introduced her briefly. "Emily's working on a project called Ellie's Way. She used to live the life you're all trying to leave behind." Someone in the back raised a hand. "What happened? You got adopted by a billionaire?" The room laughed. Emily smiled slightly. "No. I gave him a necklace. He gave me something to believe in." The laughter faded. She sat down in the circle with them. You don't have to be related to someone for them to show up for you. Sometimes, it just takes being seen. A girl near her spoke up. "But how do you trust that it's real?" Emily nodded. "You don't. Not at first. But when someone keeps showing up, even after you disappear, that's when you start to believe." Afterward, one of the students gave her a folded drawing, crude, but filled with color. It showed a hand reaching out to another, across a wall. Emily kept it. Back at home, she found Daniel waiting by the balcony again. "I think I want to go public," she said. He turned. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Not to explain myself. But to tell other kids they're not broken. That they can belong even if no one ever claimed them." He didn't speak. Just waited. "I want to do it on my terms," she added. "My words. My drawings. No cameras. Just me. I'll make sure that happens." And together, they began to draft a letter. It wouldn't be a press release. It would be a message. Not to the media. But to every kid watching from the outside, waiting for someone to call them home. The days that followed Emily's public letter were quiet in a different way, not the silence of hiding, but the calm after impact. The media flurry softened. Questions were answered by the clarity of her words, which spoke not of scandal or mystery, but of survival, resilience, and the quiet dignity of being seen. her letter had been posted through the Ellie's Way official site. No dramatic interviews, no cameras, no stage. Just her handwriting scanned and uploaded, along with 3 of her drawings, a hallway with open doors, a girl reaching for a hand through fog, and a swing suspended beneath a tree, the caption beneath it reading, "Sometimes we grow roots after the fall." Public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Letters flooded in, emails, physical cards, digital artwork from teenagers across the country. Some were from kids still in shelters, others from adults who had once lived in the spaces Emily described. She read them all. Slowly. Carefully. Like each one deserved time. Daniel watched her with a growing sense of admiration that no label, sister, friend, guardian, could quite encompass. She was building her voice, not through him, but beside him. But with exposure came caution. Daniel brought in a trauma-informed therapist and a legal advisor who specialized in guardianship law. He didn't want to impose structure on Emily, but he wanted her to have options, to make choices she had never been offered before. One afternoon, they sat on the couch, tea mugs in hand, papers spread between them. "We need to talk about something," Daniel said gently. Emily nodded. "I figured." He tapped the folder. "You don't have a legal guardian right now. You're not on school records. Your birth certificate lists your mother, but no legal custodial structure. If someone decided to challenge this situation, us living together, they might succeed." Emily stared at the papers, expression unreadable. He added quickly, "I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just saying, there's a path here, if you want it. One that makes this official." "Like adoption?" she asked softly. "Yes. But only if you want it." She looked at the ceiling. "You still want that even though I'm not your sister?" "I want that because you're Emily." Her breath hitched slightly. She looked back at the papers. "Can I think about it?" "As long as you need." Meanwhile, construction on the first Ellie's Way Center had begun in the Mission District. The site was noisy, alive with workers and scaffolding. Emily visited often, hard hat over her hoodie, sketchpad in hand. She gave suggestions, watched layout changes, asked questions. She met with the lead architect every week. Slowly, she stopped being the girl who inspired it and became part of the team. Her drawings began appearing in the hallways, murals in progress, planned installations, chalk lines to guide the color schemes. She had even begun working on a series of stained glass panels with a local artist collective. The center, once abstract, was now becoming real. Daniel gave her space, but was always there, at the meetings, at the foundation, at the apartment. Their routine had grown steadier. Breakfast together, planning sessions, sketch reviews, then quiet dinners where they didn't have to talk if they didn't want to. Therapy sessions became a fixture too, and though Emily didn't say much at first, her notebooks filled with drawings after every visit. She never showed Daniel the ones about Eleanor, but he saw the shift. There was less fog in her lines now. More color. Then came the day she asked to visit her mother's grave. It wasn't a request Daniel had expected, but he arranged everything: driver, flowers, privacy. He didn't accompany her past the gates. Emily asked to go alone. She stood by the small headstone in silence for a long time. The cemetery was still, birds moving quietly in the trees above. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the pendant against the stone for just a moment, then took it back. "I met him," she whispered. "And you were right. He remembered you." She reached into her sketchbook and tore out one of the pages, a drawing of Eleanor standing beside a garden fence, smiling at a little girl who was just beginning to bloom. "I found him, Mom. But I found me too." She left the drawing folded beneath the flowers and walked away without looking back. That evening, she returned home, because that's what the apartment had become, a place not she was staying, but a place she had started to live in. Daniel was reading on the balcony. She sat beside him, swinging her legs slowly over the edge of the seat. "I went to see her," she said. He nodded. "How was it?" "Quiet. Like she was listening." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table with the guardianship papers in front of her. "I want to do this," she said. Daniel didn't react at first. He waited. "I don't want to be someone the system can lose again," she said. "If something happens to you, if someone tries to pull me away, I want it in writing that I belong." Daniel's voice was quiet. "Then let's sign it." They completed the forms together, the pen passing back and forth like it had a weight of its own. Emily wrote her name carefully, with a steadiness she hadn't had a few months ago. The next morning, they submitted the papers to family court. There would be evaluations, a background check, an approval process, but the hardest part, the decision, had already been made. Emily told the team at Ellie's Way later that week. They clapped. Some hugged her. Others just smiled. "I'm not just helping design the first center," she said. "I want to be part of every one after this. Every wall. Every room. I want kids to know they're allowed to belong." One of the architects joked, "We'll need more drawings, then." She grinned. "You'll have them." That evening, back at the apartment, Daniel found her taping a new sketch to the wall near the door. It showed a home, not a mansion, not a perfect building, but a warm space with mismatched chairs, plants by the windows, and a couch with two figures seated close but not touching. On the coffee table was a mug, steam rising. She had written one line beneath it. "We didn't build it in one day. But we built it together." Autumn rolled in quietly across San Francisco. The days shortened, the wind cooled, and the leaves along the Mission District turned a burnt gold that dusted the sidewalks. The first Ellie's Way Center was nearly complete now. Paint was drying on the final walls. Light fixtures were being tested. Furniture, all selected by Emily, was arriving in waves, colorful, soft-edged, and welcoming. The opening ceremony had been scheduled for the following month. Invitations were being finalized. The mayor's office had called. Celebrities and donors were interested in attending, eager to be part of what they were calling the future of youth restoration in America. But Emily wasn't thinking about speeches or headlines. She was focused on a single page in her sketchbook. Not the first. Not the dozens before. The last one. She had carried that book since her first night on the street. Its pages bore drawings done in parks, on stairs, under bus stops, in shelters, on napkins, in rain-soaked corners of the city. It wasn't just a book. It was the record of her survival, her memory, her identity. Now, it was almost full. One morning, before sunrise, she stood in the main room of the Ellie's Way Center. The space was still. The tall windows overlooked the city beginning to wake. The faint buzz of traffic was distant, soft. She found her favorite corner, near the quiet room, the one with green walls, a low skylight, and shelves that would soon hold art supplies and journals. She sat on the floor, opened the book, and began to draw. Hours passed. A team of workers arrived to install signage and finalize wiring. They moved around her respectfully, knowing who she was, what this moment meant. Daniel arrived later, carrying warm pastries and 2 coffees. He found her in the corner, her eyes focused, her hands moving quickly, intentionally. He didn't interrupt. When she finally looked up, her fingers smudged with charcoal, she closed the book with a soft, almost ceremonial gesture. "It's done," she said. He walked over and sat beside her on the floor, passing her a coffee. "What did you draw?" She hesitated. "I want you to see it at the right time." "When is that?" "Tomorrow," she said. "I'm going to give it to you." That night, Emily returned to the apartment and began packing a small bag. Not to leave, just to mark a change. She folded a few clothes, carefully placed a new sketchbook into it, and set the old one atop the pile. She didn't sleep much. The next day arrived clear and bright. A rare gift in a city known for its fog. Inside the Ellie's Way Center, staff and early guests arrived slowly. No red carpet. No flash photography. Just warm lighting, soft music, and tables filled with tea, cocoa, and simple food, things that said you're safe here more than any banner could. Emily wore jeans, boots, and a deep blue sweater. Around her neck, the restored pendant glinted gently. She moved through the building like someone stepping into a space built from her own breath. At one point, she saw a young boy tracing one of her wall murals with his fingers. He couldn't have been older than 9. Alone, quiet, not ready to speak. She didn't go to him. She just smiled and kept walking. Daniel took the small stage only once, near the end of the gathering. He didn't list the statistics. He didn't thank donors by name. Instead, he told a story. Some months ago, I met a girl on a sidewalk, he began. She gave me a necklace and said, "This is yours." But it wasn't the necklace that changed my life. It was her courage. Her voice. Her art. Her way of seeing the world not as it was, but as it could be. He paused, looking out across the room. She taught me that family isn't something you inherit. It's something you fight for. Then he stepped down. After the guests had gone, and the lights were dimmed, Emily approached him in the quiet entrance hall. Her boots echoed softly on the tile. She handed him the sketchbook. "Open to the last page," she said. He did. The drawing showed 2 people, Emily and Daniel, sitting side by side on a bench overlooking the bay. No dialogue, no buildings, just them. Above them, stars, not many, but enough. Behind them, shadows of the city faded gently into the horizon. And at the bottom, written in her unmistakable hand, "I finally found where I belong." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the book gently, like it was made of glass. "I want to frame it," he said, his voice thick. "You should," she replied. "Put it by the front door. So people know what this place means." He nodded, unable to speak. That night, back at the apartment, the sketchbook sat on the entry table, open to that final page, inside a simple frame Daniel had picked up on the way home. As the evening settled in, the 2 of them sat quietly on the balcony, the city unfolding beneath them like an unfinished story. Emily leaned back, her hair pulled up loosely, the pendant warm against her skin. She turned to him. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't helped you that day?" He didn't smile. But his eyes did. "I try not to think about it," he said. "Because that's not the world I want to live in." She looked back out over the city. "Me neither." The silence that followed was not heavy or hollow. It was whole. Not everything in life ends with clarity. Not every story wraps with symmetry. But sometimes, you don't need closure. Sometimes, all you need is a home. And someone to sit beside you while you draw the last page.